Nate Oats and the Alabama Crimson Tide were reportedly very surprised by the news that Charles Bediako is staying in the NBA draft process rather than returning to Alabama. What is next for Bediako, and is there hope for Alabama to find some front court help in the transfer portal?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, and today's episode is brought to you by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege, and when you enter promo code LockedOnCollege, they will throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. All right, joined today by the great Leif Thulin of the Locked On NBA Big Board, regular guest for us on Locked On College Basketball, also currently the temporary host of the Locked On Jazz podcast. Congratulations to you, Leif. Very excited to get your thoughts on 4 fun NBA draft prospects that we're going to talk about in the final 2 segments of the show, guys who seemed to boost their stock with strong performances at the Combine. But we are going to lead off the show talking about Mr. Charles Bediako, 2-year starter for Alabama at the center position. Very, very good defensive player, very good rim runner, not a particularly elite scorer in the sense that he didn't score a lot of points. I think he was under 7 points per game in each of his 2 seasons at Alabama, but a guy who is now going to stay in the draft process. And Leif, I want to get to what this is going to mean for Alabama. But before we do that, I kind of want to hear just your thoughts on his decision to stay in the draft process and maybe a little bit about what his NBA draft kind of combine process, like what it looks like for him right now as he looks towards late June in the draft.
Yeah, Bediako staying in surprised me. I think the rationale would be that Noah Pringle was kind of pushing on the door and improving as the year went on in the play. I almost said playoffs because I've been watching the playoffs in March Madness.
Right.
You saw Pringle kind of push Bediako a little bit. So I wonder if it's not quite to the degree of Adama Sanogo getting bumped out of UConn, even though he's the most outstanding player. But Klingon probably was better. And they knew it, or a Philip Petrusev and Drew Timme situation. I don't know if it's quite that, but I wonder if that played a factor because otherwise Pringle would have transferred and Bediako thought maybe my odds are good enough because I was anchoring one of the best defenses in the country, the top rebounding team in the country. So therefore I have got a chance right now. So I wonder if it factored that in, but I was still surprised in today's day and age where you make money and there's not that incentive of making different amounts of money as a pro for a guy who's a non-guaranteed draft pick. I would have expected him to transfer or look on the market, see if he can get some money, then find a place that fits him very well. Bediako is a good player. I don't foresee him having much success in terms of being drafted, but I could see him carving out a role in the NBA down the road. I just feel like he's a little bit raw. I mean, it'll be him. It'll be Colin Castleton, Cliff Omoruyi kind of fighting for those late round or late second round picks, or maybe they're the top coveted big guys on the undrafted free agent market.
Yeah, but the Pringle thing makes sense. And I kind of figured we would eventually kind of touch on his role and how much it's obviously going to be expanded next year for Alabama. But yeah, it does feel like if a decision was going to be made in this regard, that it would have been made to enter the portal, at least enter the draft process and also enter the transfer portal, because the amount of money and potential interest that Bediako would have got in the transfer portal feels a lot to me. Like the NIL stuff is so difficult for us to pin down. Like we're hearing these outrageous numbers for somebody like Jesse Edwards. Is he actually getting $750,000? I don't know. Is he getting promised that? And are they going to deliver on that? Like there's a lot of aspects of NIL that until it is more regulated and the numbers are more revealed, if that ever happens, it kind of makes it hard to project. But I suspect that your theory that there's more money for him, or at least a comparable amount of money for him if he stays in college versus going in the professional route, is probably correct. And a lot of the insights that I have read about this say that people felt that he needed one more year. I'm not sure what he would have done differently in another year at Alabama. It's not like he's going to all of a sudden become a 38% three-point shooter, which is the kind of thing that would dramatically increase his draft stock. That's not super likely or at all really feasible for Bediako. So to me, I can kind of see just saying, hey, I'm ready to move on. Maybe he doesn't like school. Like there's a lot of different factors here that we're not necessarily privy to, but it was surprising to me to see a big back to the basket, not outside shooting center choose the NBA over college, because lately it has kind of been the exact opposite for most of the guys that kind of fit that archetype.
Yeah, I share that sentiment. I mean, Jesse Edwards is a good example. I think Edwards is probably a slightly better college basketball player than Bediako, but he's also older. Like, who's to say that Bediako's third year couldn't have been like Jesse Edwards' performance last year was if he was more featured? Like, you got to think about there's Brandon Miller, who collected 8 rebounds a game, and then there was Noah Clowney, who's also probably going to be a top 20 pick, who collected 8.5 rebounds a game. And so his counting stats were pedestrian, but his impact was pretty large still on a loaded basketball team. So maybe your team's not as good, which I understand is not what you want to hear if you're an Alabama fan or if you're Nate Oats. But I think Bediako had a very real possibility of putting up big stats of the ilk of Jesse Edwards. I'm curious to see if Bediako has a way of, like, does he measure in with a longer wingspan that just all of a sudden says, okay, we might as well take a shot on this guy because he's still pretty young. He played 2 years and he was a highly regarded prospect who lived up to the hype from, like, more or less. Like, it wasn't crazy output, but if you're picked, 25th was, I believe, where he was around 25th through 30th in your recruiting class. You're now a starting center on a team that was the number 1 team in the country as a sophomore, and he started as a freshman. That's living up to success. So I share your sentiment that I would have expected him to just transfer. I would have expected him to stay in the college ranks based on the NIL climate of what you hear. But I wonder if he's got like an ace in his sleeve of something that we don't know that makes him more confident, or if it just is like a seemingly puzzling decision in all regards.
Yeah, totally could be that. Sometimes people make decisions that we don't really understand. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Before we move on from the topic, I do want to talk a little bit more about this from the Alabama side. We mentioned Noah Pringle almost certainly stepping into a starting role or a significantly more featured role, which was going to happen, I think, regardless, just with the amount of talent that this team has lost already. But now it's even more clear for him. But I wonder if you think there are some potential, like, late game transfer portal moves that Alabama could try to make. They have made some solid additions in the portal, but all in the backcourt. They add Aaron Estrada from Hofstra. They add Latrell Wrightsell from Cal State Fullerton, 2 very talented guards. But do you think that, I mean, we look at the names that are kind of available right now. There's Ernest Uday. Is he get a chance? Is there a chance they could go land him, even though Duke's kind of sniffing around? Connor Vanover, a guy who spent a lot of time at Arkansas, would he go to Alabama? Obviously it would be a more reserve role for him there, but there's not a ton of front court depth in the portal right now that's super appealing. And I wonder if you think if Bama's really going to go that route, or if they might just say, hey, we're okay with what we got and we're just going to let those guys play some more minutes next year.
Yeah, I would personally say let Noah Pringle eat on the inside. I mean, he was battling against Nathan Mensah in that game that they lost. I thought he was one of the bright spots of that game, able to battle on the glass, get some offensive rebounds. In his limited minutes, his per rebound numbers are really impressive. So I think Noah Pringle is going to be a guy who breaks out in SEC play this year. As for the transfer additions, I'll never say that they won't continue to make additions. I think it's unwise to say that in the era of basketball that we're witnessing. But I don't foresee it being in the front court. I feel like those guards you mentioned are nice players. While they're nice players, they're not needle movers in the SEC. So maybe a player that goes to Alabama on the wing could enter. I just don't see any players in the front court that I think would like to, battle out for time with Noah Pringle, because like I mentioned, I think that may have been a contributing factor for Bediako's premature departure.
Well, Leif, ton of insight coming our way here and perspective to share with us about some of these draft risers. I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on the two guys we're going to cover here in the second segment, Virginia guard Reece Beekman and Texas forward Dillon Mitchell. Before we get to that, though, today's episode of the Locked On College Basketball Podcast is brought to you by Birddogs. Let me tell you about our brand new sponsor, Birddogs. As we move into the summer and short season, I just got a couple pairs of Birddogs for the very first time. Usually I'm not particularly concerned about the shorts that I'm wearing, but I actually really look forward to the days where I get to wear these Birddogs because they are so comfortable. They fit perfectly. The stretchy fabric makes them easy to wear in any situation, and they just kind of fit any situation. I can wear them on a date. I can wear them to the swimming pool. I can wear them in my yard. I can just wear them walking around the house. Either way, it just doesn't matter. They're super practical. It gets really hot in this room when I'm recording podcasts. I was just kind of saying this earlier. I've been recording a lot of podcasts lately before I go on vacation, and it's nice to have something that's stretchy, that's cool. The liner helps me feel like I can focus more on the show and don't have to worry about anything else going on. So if you want to feel the same way, all you need to do is go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. And when you enter our promo code LOCKEDONCollege, they will throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti style tumbler with every single order. Birddogs, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Leif, want to talk a little bit about your experience at the NBA Draft Combine, of course, getting the opportunity to see a handful of the very best college basketball overtime elite players, everybody who was there and kind of what they're bringing to the NBA draft process. But we kind of had a back and forth, figured out which guys we wanted to talk about here on today's show. We'll hopefully be able to cover many more players over the next few weeks leading up to the NBA draft. But I want to start talking about a guy that I know for a fact you are a big fan of. We've talked about this on and off the podcast in the past, and that is Reece Beekman. Beekman, 6'3" guard, played 3 years at Virginia, averaged 9.5 points and just over 5 assists per game last year. Talk to me about what you saw from him at the Combine and kind of what makes you, I presume, even more excited about his potential NBA draft, where he might end up and what he might be able to do at the next level.
Yeah, for context, Reece Beekman is a guy who defensively is where he makes his money. Mm-hmm. He was the defensive player of the year this past year in the ACC, and I spoke to Reece Beekman, and he said he thought he was more deserving of the ACC defensive player of the year prior when he did not win it. And he said that he thought Jesse Edwards had a really strong case this past year. So, I mean, that speaks to modesty, but defense is what his main calling card is at the NBA. So a lot of teams, you want a second unit guy to be a defensive disruptor, put some pressure on the ball. And then what else does Beekman do? Like, you could put this into context. Virginia plays exceptionally slowly, as those who are listening to this probably know. Yeah. What I think will help him is Beekman's game isn't built on like guile. He's fast, and he's learned how to play the pick and roll as they incorporated more and more pick and roll into what was typically a blocker mover. I spoke to him on that, and if you guys want more insight on that, I posted this on Twitter, my interview with Reece Beekman, and he basically told me what he's trying to learn in the NBA is prove that he can shoot spot ups and that he's comfortable playing with the space and pace of the NBA, which I think will actually help his unique traits is the space of the NBA. He can get downhill, and he did so at will at the Combine against these superior athletes to what anyone is used to facing in college basketball. Beekman was still getting to the rim at will, missed a few layups, but he would get there all the time, and he'd tap his own rebound. He had 3 steals in each game and could have been more, as they were basically platooning guards. They would switch off, and they would do full sell hockey subs occasionally. And so he's someone that I thought made himself some money that weekend, or last week, I should say, just because a lot of these players aren't used to running a show with players that need the ball as often as they do because they're the most talented. He was able to run it seamlessly, defend top-level guards, and give them fits. And then he made a few shots as well. So I think he's someone who improved his stock from around 50 to I expect him to go in the first 10 picks of the second round, if not sooner. So I think he really made himself some money. And the one sad thing is I love watching Virginia play, and Beekman, I think, has been the best player the last few years. So that'll be a little bittersweet for me.
Yeah, it'll be a bummer to not have him back in the college ranks next year, assuming that's the case, the situation. But it's always fun to see guys who are like, you have a comparison of a guy like Amani Bates, who's a very offensive focused player and is used to having the ball in his hands a lot. And then you have him going up against a guy like Reece Beekman, like just using specific player examples here. You have a guy like Beekman who's, again, he's going to make his money on the defensive end of the floor, and they're just such different types of players who participate in these events. And it's always interesting to kind of see how that's going to shake out. And for Beekman, for him to show some of those skills of like, hey, I can get to the basket and I can play a little bit faster pace game than what you saw in college. Like, that's probably what a lot of scouts really needed to see from him. So it's encouraging that he was able to go out there and do that. Dillon Mitchell was the other. Sorry, go ahead, Leif.
Oh, one last note is I think his biggest calling card that he didn't get a show at Virginia is I can pass in a blocker mover when the pass is premeditated. Like, you're going to find the guy on the wing, and if they set a good screen, they'll be open. I think you learned that he can operate a pick and roll, and that was huge for executives because you knew he was going to defend the ball well. So if he can run a pick and roll, defend the ball well, hit a few jump shots, he's not a great shooter, but he hit a few. Why can't he be Trey Jones-esque? Someone that's already carved out solid minutes in the NBA. He's a little different than Andrew Nembhard, a Zag, who, is more offensively oriented. He can really run the pick and roll. But I think he's a better defender than Andrew Nembhard, who also is pretty good on that side and was getting all rookie votes. So I think there's definitely a place in the NBA for these kind of upperclassmen guards that pride themselves on one side of the ball and have a specific skill set, and then they can translate it into success in the NBA level.
Well, the cleanest way to transition away from talking about upperclassmen guards is to talk about a one and done wing, which is who we're going to talk about next. That's Dillon Mitchell out of the University of Texas, a player that I was extremely interested to see how this was going to work for him, because every year there's a couple one and done guys like this where they really didn't produce much in college. And there's no debate that that's the case with Mitchell here, about 4 points, 4 boards per game, really deep, really veteran laden Texas squad. They had so many guys who were in their 5th and final year of college basketball last year. So not a shock that Mitchell didn't get a ton of playing time, a very productive scorer from an efficiency standpoint, but he didn't even shoot any threes like in college. It just wasn't a part of his game. Leif, I'd love to hear what stood out about how he performed at the combine. Again, a player that I think a lot of scouts and GMs really needed to see something from in order to know how they wanted to evaluate him heading into this season.
Yeah, I think you really gave the background nicely there of that they were in a win now mode. And he alluded to this. This is another guy that I got to interact with personally and I interviewed. So if you want to find that one on Twitter, it's also there. And his main pitch to me, I asked him a question, essentially that is, what are you trying to show the scouts? Because obviously the jump shot's a concern, but what else are you trying to show them? Because they know you're a good athlete.
Right.
And he basically said, well, I played on a team where we had to win because we had turmoil with the coach, and that's Chris Beard, and Rodney Terry comes in. You had to win. And so what does that typically mean in college? That means playing your upperclassmen. That means getting shots to your trio of upperclassmen guards. Sergio Rice was at the combine, hardly played, but he was the vocal leader for one of the teams. Like he's 24 years old, 6th year of college basketball. Marcus Carr, for years and years, has been the guy on all the teams he's played on at Minnesota and Texas. So he's playing a 4th, 5th wheel as you get Dylan Dessou, you get Christian Bishop, all these guys touching the ball. And of course, you get the transfer Tyrese Hunter. So I think what he meant by this is if they're trying to win, and my role is to be an energy guy, I'm going to be an energy guy because I want to play. So what I'm trying to show is that I can shoot. It was just something that we opted not to do because it wasn't experimentation time. So he told me that he's worked on a shot, the form's changed a little bit, but mostly it's just working up confidence and repetitions because he lacked those at Texas. From my perspective of watching him there, he moves differently than everyone else at the combine. He's that good of an athlete. Like I likened his ability to flip his hips to that of a defensive back. Like he is 6'9" and as graceful as you can be sliding your feet. And he jumps out of the gym. Like he goes off 1 foot, 2 foot in layup lines, and all of a sudden his head's above the rim. And it's without effort. And so he's that rare of an athlete. So here's my pitch for why I think, even though he shot very poorly in the second game, because he hit a 3, confidently hit a 3 in the first scrimmage, and then he's a left-hander, for those who don't know. He went in and out, left to right, and hit a baseline jumper. He hit those 2 shots in the first game. Because he hit those, I thought for certain there was not a chance he'd play the next day. And then I honestly am thrilled that he did. To have the confidence, the chutzpah to go out there and play again after knowing that's your knock, and you kind of push that aside. You come out and play, and he shot poorly, but he kept shooting, and then he eventually got a little tip in or something. Pedestrian stats, but his impact was enormous. I think he's going to be a first-round pick. I think he follows the ilk of a guy like Peyton Watson, who averaged 3 points a game at UCLA the year prior, was the 30th pick, and it doesn't even look like the Nuggets got it wrong. Like I just did for a podcast for the Jazz, and I looked at the 28th pick. The 28th pick has 2 big hits in Jaden McDaniels and Jordan Poole, and the rest of them don't do anything. So at 30, if you're going to take a guy with upside, you might as well take the best athlete in the class. Yep. And so that's my pitch right there. Peyton Watson, I watched him play at the very end of the year against the Jazz. He had a play where he went so high in the air, he fell on his back. I was like, oh, my God, the guy's going to be out for a year. Got up and ran the floor and got an and one. I think Dillon Mitchell can provide energy minutes, eventually learn to shoot well enough to be on the court. And even if not, you got a guy who's an energy backup big who can play small ball big. So I think he made himself a ton of money by playing the combine.
That the Dillon Mitchell comp with Watson makes a ton of sense to me. So similar guys of being, not very productive one and done college guys, but high level athletes. And yeah, if you're picking in the late first round and you have the ability to, if you're the Jazz and it's your 3rd first round pick, or you're a team that has the ability to draft a guy and maybe wait on him a little bit because you already have a full rotation, you're a team with NBA championship aspirations who tends to be picking in the late first round, like Mitchell's a guy who makes a ton of sense because either he contributes right away, which is a huge bonus, or he doesn't, and you develop him over time. If he doesn't pan out, most people picked in the late 20s don't pan out. If he does pan out, awesome. You probably made yourself a really good pick. And I like that comparison a lot because I could see why a team picking in that range might totally make this decision here on him. Well, Leif, we got a pair of West Coast guards to talk about to close out the show here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Very different West Coast guards, mind you. We're going to talk about UCLA one and done, Amari Bailey. We're also going to talk about Brandin Podziemski, one of the biggest risers throughout the college basketball season. Before we get to those guys, though, we're going to take a quick break. All right, segment 3, still Eddie Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, still here with the great Leif Thulin, talking NBA Draft Combine and his experience there, checking out the event, getting an opportunity to talk to many of the players who are participating. And we got 2 more guys we want to talk about here to close out the show. I want to lead talking about Amari Bailey, a guy who was productive at UCLA. He doesn't quite fall into that Peyton Watson category or that Dillon Mitchell category, averaged over 10 points per game for the Bruins, but I think kind of came on really late. It felt like there was a chunk of the season where it was like, is he even going to be a one and done? Could he be a guy who comes back to UCLA for year 2? And he made it pretty clear he's not planning to do so. And he did a lot of favors for himself by playing very well down the stretch, really taking on a bigger role after Jalen Clark suffered that injury. 6'5" guard, again, 11 points per game, 2.5 assists, about 4 boards. Really nice 3-point shooter as well, just under 39% for the season. Leif, what did you see out of Amari Bailey during the combine? Was there anything that kind of stood out that maybe you didn't know that he had in the bag, or anything that kind of helped him potentially rise his stock ahead of the draft?
I wouldn't say it was necessarily shocking, but he shot the ball well, both in field goal percentage and then just kind of demonstrated touch that you could have put as a concern, since a lot of his shots are layups or catch and shoots. He is extremely left-hand dominant. And there's one train of thought that says, wow, that is unsustainable. And the other train of thought is like, I'm impressed. He's so quick and so able to get to his left. Maybe there weren't extensive scouting reports given to these guys in scrimmage teams, but he was able to get to his left in both scrimmage games all day long. I have my notebook here that I took, and I'm pretty sure in the 2 games Amari Bailey played, I jotted down every single time he went right, and it was about twice. And he went left every other time, and I pretty much jotted down a note every time he did anything. That said, he was good. Like, he was one of the more polished scorers because he would get to his left, he'd finish, and he demonstrated an ability when he did go right, rarely, to kind of stop, lean back, and shoot his lefty little fade, and he knocked them down. So I think he improved his stock. I do not think he can play point guard. It would be my concern. I felt like his passing reads, even though he had a fair number of assists, were a bit late. His pick and roll reads were typically, hey, I'll shoot it once I hold you off long enough and I get to an area where I can shoot. So I think he's a 2 guard, which limits his upside, in my opinion. I think the point guard, because he'd be a bigger point guard as opposed to a smaller 2 guard, limits his upside. But I wouldn't be shocked if he goes at the end of the first round. A team buys the fact that he can get wherever he wants, that he's younger. He's a very different player from Podziemski that we're going to talk about next. But I think both improved their stocks based on the virtues that they possess. They showed those rather than showing glaring deficiencies, which is what kind of hurts some of these players that really plug in the point like, hey, he is bad at this, and there's nothing you can do about it. Where those guys just showed their strengths and hammered home their strengths rather than trying too many new things.
With Bailey, one thing I'll be interested in too, because I think you're absolutely right. He's going to be an undersized two guard who, you know, has the quickness and the ability to score at the NBA level. But what is that defense going to look like? Because I thought he was a solid defensive player at UCLA, but if you're an undersized two guard in the NBA and you're not going to play point guard, you have to be good on that end of the floor. Otherwise, unless you're CJ McCollum and you're such an unbelievably gifted scorer, and even CJ, like the Blazers learned you can't really win with him as your two guy because there's not enough defense. Of course, when you pair him with Damian Lillard, it's particularly problematic, but Bailey feels like a guy who can probably be a pretty impactful player on the defensive end of the floor. Is that the impression you got from him?
Yeah, I think he's got the abilities to be that. The reason I phrase it that way is I think he's got very good lateral speed. I just wonder if he knows how to defend yet. Like Mick Cronin's a very good college defensive coach, someone who packs it in, makes you shoot over the top. They force a decent number of turnovers, but really their defense is their pace of play. Like they play so slow that you don't get fast breaks. They're going to win the turnover margin by a wide margin. But I don't know if he knows how to scramble over screens and do the things that make you an elite defensive two guard in the NBA. He's got the capacity with the agility, and he's got pretty good length for his size. He's about 6'4" with fairly long arms. But I think that one's to be determined. It depends. I wonder, like, say he goes to the Miami Heat. Like that's a place where I feel like they'll teach him defense, and he could be very good if he buys in. Whereas I think there's landing spots where he could be a subpar defender just off of kind of like, oh, I can do this because I'm athletic. And then the NBA, he's just another dude as opposed to an above average athlete.
Well, let's switch over to talk about our final guy for the day. That is, of course, Brandin Podziemski, who we teased a little bit earlier. Very different player from Amari Bailey, as you said. Different story as well. Podziemski's kind of the one of the poster boys in the modern transfer portal era of, hey, sometimes you can transfer, and I hate this phrase, and I've said that multiple times on the show, transfer down and go from a mid-major, a Power 5 program to a mid-major program where you're going to get more exposure, more playing time. Podziemski started at Illinois, moved over to Santa Clara, picked a school that had just recently had significant NBA success in Jalen Williams, and he's following that up, and looks like, you know, a potential for there to be back-to-back first-round picks out of Santa Clara. I think Podziemski's kind of right in that maybe late first, maybe second round kind of spot. And again, he scored more points in his first game at Santa Clara than he did his entire freshman season at Illinois, which is a fact that I like to bring up whenever I can. 20 points per game, was co-WCC Player of the Year with Drew Timme, which was a bit questionable whether that should have happened, but there's no disrespect to Podziemski at all. 20 a game, just under 9 boards a game, 4 assists, really, really good three-point shooter, and a guy who has kind of just showed a little bit of everything on the offensive end of the floor. Feels like a lot of people got to learn about him for the very first time last week. What were the things that you kind of took away from how he performed at the Combine?
I think the biggest takeaway for him is just how well he sees the game. Like you watch him in the WCC, and there's only a couple teams that have the athletes that are on par or even close to on par with what he faced at the Combine. And so basically that means the reads have more time to be made because there's less good reaction time. There's less length. I thought he was the best passer at the Combine. I thought he got to spots and made his team look better, particularly in the first scrimmage. He stood out, hit his shots from both the mid-range and from three, silky smooth left-hand jump shot. And he made decisive, impressive, and timely reads. And that's something I mentioned about Bailey lacking. I thought whenever he ran the pick and roll, he was late passing the ball. Podziemski was right on the money, hit the guy in the numbers, and was doing it decisively. So I think he's made himself a case to go in the first round. I'm not certain he goes there, but I think he's made a case for it. And then he had a really good line. And so I hope I don't butcher this. It was effectively – I was talking to him and he said, I'm a hooper who can shoot, not a shooter who can hoop. And that's what he wanted to clarify, because he wanted to say, look, I can play basketball. It's not just because I'm white. And I think that was reading between the lines that I can just shoot. I think he wanted to prove that no matter who he's playing against, no matter the competition level, the size of the players he's playing against, that he's going to be able to hoop and make the right basketball plays and still score if he wants to. So I thought he did a really good job of demonstrating that, and I thought that was a pretty fun line as well.
Leif, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show to give us your expertise, your insight, your conversations from the NBA Draft Combine. That's 4 guys we covered today. There's literally 70 plus more. Hopefully we'll get more opportunities to speak to you about other players who are at the Combine and draft stocks up, draft stock down. Of course, we're a week away from finding out who is actually going to for sure stay in the draft process, who's not. So we'll get some more opportunities to kind of react to some of that stuff. But again, thank you for jumping on the show. Always appreciate it.
I always appreciate you coming on. I love talking ball no matter when, no matter NBA, college, or anything. So I wish I had a clever line like Podziemski, but I'm a guy who can talk ball. It doesn't matter college or NBA.
Oh, man. Well, that's going to do it for us today. We'll end on that joke there. Thank you so much for listening to the show, all of you everyday listeners, whether this is your first show, 20th show, 100th show, whatever it may be. We sincerely appreciate all of you. You can find the show wherever you already get your podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube if you have not done so yet. We're about 30 away from hitting our main goal of 1,000. I've been saying I want to get there before the NBA draft, but folks, we can get there before June. If you all want to help us out, you can just jump on YouTube, search Locked On College Basketball, hit that big red subscribe button. It is very much appreciated. All right. Thank you all for listening, and peace out.